thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to present this research on the Torah. So what we see in the picture is an engraving of Hans Holbein, the son of Adam and Eve, of the expulsion from paradise, and maybe we'll get back to it at the end. And yeah, I would like to start by what I'm going to present here is a kind of reading of the Torah, of the 5 books of the Torah, of the narrative at least of the Torah, but also not of the legal part of the Torah, that is somewhat original, but it is scientific, it is historical. But it is not historical in the ordinary way that we hear historical reading of the Torah. So to get a notion of what kind of history I'm aiming for, I want us to read a little bit. It's a little bit long passage, but I want us to read it in entirety of Hannah Arendt from The Concept of History. There's a book. A collection of articles that I think in English it is entitled Between Past and Present, and that is the first, I think, or second article, The Concept of History, and it begins more or less with this paragraph. With Herodotus, words and deeds and events, that is, those things that owe their existence exclusively to men, became the subject matter of history. Of all man-made things, these are the most futile. The works of human hands owe part of their existence to the material nature and therefore carry within themselves some measure of permanence, borrowed as it were from the being forever of nature. But what goes on between mortals directly, the spoken word and all the actions and deeds which the Greeks called praxis or pragmata, as distinguished from poiesis, fabrication, can never outlast the moment of their realization, would never leave any trace without the help of remembrance. The task of the poet and historiographer consists in making something lasting out of remembrance. They do this by translating praxis and lexis, action, speech, into that kind of poiesis or fabrication which eventually becomes the written word. So this is how I read the Torah, as a text, a written word, that is a text of remembrance. And the historical reality, if you'd like, that I'm looking for when I read the Torah, through the Torah, is the speech of and around the Torah. This is what I am looking for. That means the conversations that took place around the composition of the text and the early readings. Okay, I suppose that these texts were not written by one person who then archived it in some library, but that they were written in the context of a discussion, a conversation, and that they were read and ignited conversations, that people were engaged in these readings, unlike what happens today in the synagogue, of course, but I believe that the stories and the laws and the narration that we find in the Torah was engaging at one point. And I'm interested in the conversations that took place around these readings. The text of the Torah is the medium through which we get to these conversations. So this is a change of perspective, because normally a scientific reading or historical reading of the Torah takes the text itself as its object. And I'm saying here, no, it is not. Of course, it's extremely important because it is the only testimony that was left by the people who read it. And what we are interested in are the words that were exchanged between these people. The text of the Torah is the medium through which we can access these texts. I propose to see it like a mirror that reflects these oral exchanges, or a soundboard that let us hear these echoes of these conversations. Where do we situate this conversation? This is somewhat arbitrary, but for several reasons that we may come to discuss after the conclusion, I situate these conversations at the turn of the 1st century BCE, in the middle of not necessarily the middle or the early beginning of the so-called Persian period. Okay, when Jerusalem, so I situate it in Jerusalem. It is important in the city of Jerusalem. The readings are always, to some extent, public. It's not one person who reads it for himself. It is one person who reads for a public of readers. And we'll speak a little bit more about the setting of these readings later. So why should we bother to hear this conversation? Why is it interesting? Why is it important? So these conversations are, I believe, theological, political, in the sense that the subject is about how to bring together God and the city. Some God would designate here some ideal order, and the city would designate here the current political order. Okay? These conversations continued in Jerusalem until its temple was destroyed by Titus, or sometimes before, and then departed in various branches, mainly the Christian and the Rabbinic. So this is the change of perspective that I'm looking for. The conversation itself is the historical object, is the object of the historical research. And the conversation, I believe, has a life of its own, okay? That is represented by the text, but it is not completely contained in the text, okay? And this conversation, this theological, political conversation, at one point diverge in two main currents that we call the Christian and the Rabbinic. The so-called parting of the ways, I think it in terms of two conversations. Focusing on the discursive environment of the early readers allows us to get rid of theological and academic concepts such as the religion of ancient Israel or monotheism, all these concepts that meant nothing to the people who actually read these texts and for whom these texts were meaningful. So if we read the text correctly, we can reconstruct the discursive and symbolic universe of its early readers instead of imposing on it the epistemology of 19th century European, mostly German thought, okay? Which is mostly the case today in biblical scholarship. Whether it is more theological or more historical, and we can get to it later. So of course the method that I introduce here can be regarded as post-Spinozist. So I want to start by reminding us how Spinoza read the text. And now I'm not talking only about the Torah, I'm talking about the text of Genesis to Kings, the narrative parts of the Bible. Okay, the main narrative of the Bible, of the Tanakh, and also of the Christian Bible, begins in the book of Genesis and go all through the book of Kings. After that, these are the prophets and so on. But these books can be read as one unit. Spinoza read them as one unit as well. And I give here a quotation from chapter 8 of the Theological Political Tractate. And that the title of this chapter is, in which it is shown that the Pentateuch and the books of Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, and Kings are not autographed, that is, that they were written by someone else. So he says, therefore all these books agree in having one purpose, to teach the statements and edicts of Moses and to demonstrate them through the outcome of things. And that is, I think, still the dominant view when we read these books, that these books are try to convey ideologies, to convey ideas that would inspire submission and obedience either to ideas or to commandments. Okay, this is in biblical scholarship today. I believe that I believe that the dominant view is that the books were written in an ideological effort to convey sometimes contradicting or opposing ideologies, but that was the objective, okay, of the books. And that he says that it was written by Ezra. Of course, we believe that it was written a little bit later than Ezra. But let's see what Spinoza missed, okay? The story do not inspire reverence and obedience. If we read the stories as we would read, if we read the book of Genesis as we would read any other book, without imposing on it our preconceived theological notions, we see that the stories do not inspire reverence and obedience. The divine protagonist, the God Yahvé, is a character like any other character. He is motivated by desire and need. The narrator's point of view do not coincide with his. His portrayal seems to be critical or satiric, and maybe we'll get to see some examples of it. But I really invite you to read the book of Genesis and see what I'm talking about. A few examples. In at least 2 moments in the so-called primeval history, these are the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis, the narrators evoke Yahvé's anxiety regarding the possibility that the humans will be his equals. I'm talking about the Gan Eden story, the Garden of Eden story, and the, maybe you remember? Tower of Babel, of course. Yahvé's pride is used 2 times as a leverage by Moses to save the people from his wrath. 2 times, after the golden calf episode and after the spy episode. You know, that the spy that are sent to the promised land, to Canaan, and then they come back and they say that the land is full with giants and there's a great havoc, and Yahvé says, I can't stand it anymore, I will just leave these people and I will make you the leader of another nation, and I will take care of you, but these people, I will leave them to die alone in the desert. And then what Moses tells him, no, if you say so, then everyone will say that this God has just saved these people from slavery to kill them in the desert. So 2 times he kind of turned to his vanity in some way to save the people. Yahvé's plan to make Moses the leader that will liberate the Hebrew slaves meet unexpected obstacles, beginning with Moses' unwillingness to take on the job. This is, of course, the scene of the Asnea Boer, the burning bush. Of course, we read it with so much theological seriousness, but actually, when we read it without thinking that Yahvé is the monotheistic God with all the reverence that we owe to this construct, then we see that it is rather satirical, that it can be even funny. The exchange between Moses and Yahvé is like an exchange between a boss and his worker or something like that. And of course, the flaws and the faults of other emblematic heroes as Abraham, Jacob, and David are exposed very openly. And again, how can you say that the story of David inspired reverence, for example? How can you say that Abraham, who sells his wife to Pharaoh, inspires reverence and obedience? So this is a few examples that show us why the stories, as I said, do not inspire reverence and obedience. And of course, the question is, how could Spinoza, who is a brilliant reader, a brilliant man and a brilliant reader of the text, how could he miss it? So my proposal, and of course it's only a proposal, is as follows. The theological political treatise is built on the premise that the common people, which is a term vulgo that he uses quite a lot in the theological political treatise, and that he kind of abandons later on. And in his political tractate, he doesn't use the term multitude. And it is very interesting, this, when he doesn't speak about the Bible, of course, in that other treaty, but in the theological political treaty, he uses a lot the term of vulgo, and he has a very bad opinion of this vulgo, because he says, actually, that it is an argument that I can argue that the theological political treatise is built on this argument that the vulgo, the ordinary people, cannot participate in a truthful conversation about God and politics, in the theological political conversation. In Amsterdam and other European cities of the 17th century, this city included, I guess, that was perhaps a realist vision. Wealth and power were the outcome of a process that relied on the mass enslavement of people in lands out of sight. The fortune that families like Spinoza's made or did not make, their value, was determined by an economic system that was based on extreme cruelty and injustice. Now, slavery was denounced in Europe, and also the cruelty of colonialism was acknowledged and denounced in Europe from as early as the 16th century, but the reality itself did not change, and the efforts made to deny or to embellish it only contributed to the ignorance of the people and to their alienation. Now, my claim is that, and hence the title of this paper, Words of Slave, is that in Jerusalem of the Persian period, slaves were part of the conversation, and that the figure of Yahvé, the biblical figure of Yahvé, his flaws, his shortcomings, are expressions of that, are expression of the voices of the dominated people. The subalterns could speak, if we can use a very paraphrase the famous article of Spivak. So in order to give a notion of this reality in which the slaves could speak and to see how it could happen, and how it could happen from what we know from the biblical text itself, I want us to go back to the event of the foundation of the theological political community, or the foundation of the theological political conversation, according to the book of Nehemiah. So, for those who do not remember or know, the book of Nehemiah is a report, is written like a report by Nehemiah, who is I forgot what's the name, Sarah Mashkim, like the one who serves drinks to the cupbearer. The cupbearer of the Persian king, who is sent, or he sends himself with the approval of the king to Jerusalem to reinvigorate the process of the reconstruction of the city and of the temple. Okay, the temple is already there, but there are a lot of problems with the local community, with the fracture between the very thin urban class of the priests and the rural majority that is to a large extent enslaved by the priest. Okay, this is if you read the book of Nehemiah, you can hear echoes from of this reality, and the book reports that at one point there was this event that later rabbis called HaKnesset HaGdolah, the Great Assembly. Okay, and this event was in this event all the people of the province came to Jerusalem, participated in these three ceremonies, and at the end of which they signed a covenant, an amanah, okay? And this amanah, this signing of the covenant, was the beginning of the theological, political community of Israel. Okay, and that is a very, the book of Nehemiah, as you know, it's a very, like the book of Ezra that precedes it, these are very historical books. There is no divine intervention, unlike Genesis to Kings. Okay, so these are historical reports of historical events. Maybe the events did not happen exactly as they are described, but again, what we are interested in is the conversation that took place in Jerusalem, and less the historical events and the historicity of these events. And what is interesting is that in the description of this event of the Great Assembly, the second event, the second ceremony that was part of the Great Assembly that the people participated in was a retelling of the story of Yahvé and Israel. The Levites, after the people heard the law from Ezra, okay, that is the first ceremony that we are told about in chapter 8, then they heard the story, the narrative of the God, Yahvé, and the people of Israel. And I don't know if you remember the way the story is told, but the story that is told from a point, it is clearly ideological. It is a story that is told in a way that is very repetitive, in the sense that the recurring motive is Yahvé saved the people from the slavery, the people betrayed him, then he punished them, then they prayed to him to save him, and then he saved them, but then they betrayed him once again, and over again. They are very ungrateful, they are very inconsistent, and the God is always good, and the people is always bad. That is the main motive of the so-called confession of the Levites. That is the story that the Levites tell the people. Now, the story, it ends with a prayer that the Levites pray to Yahvé in front of the people and in front of the priests. And the prayer says as follows: Now therefore, our Elohim, the great El, mighty and awesome, who keeps the covenant and the grace, do not let all these hardships seem trifling in your eyes. The hardship that has come on us, on our kings and leaders, on our priests and prophets, on our fathers and all of your people, from the days of the king of Assyria until today. This is very interesting because it is the only time in this long discourse of the Levites where another actor is to blame, which is the kings of Assyria. And it's not only the people's fault, but it's very discreetly they remind the people that the fault is also the imperial order. The king of Assyria, what does it mean, the days of the king of Assyria? It means the moment in which the region became of interest to the king of the Assyrian kingdom in the 9th century BCE, or in the 8th century BCE, sorry, and the kingdoms of, the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom was destroyed, the southern kingdom was somehow saved, but still continued to pay tributes to the Assyrian kings. And what we know of today is that the taxing system that was established by the Assyrian king in the 8th century continued to function all through the Babylonian period and the Persian period and the early Hellenistic period. And it is only in the Hasmonean period, when Jerusalem became the capital of a kingdom, that the system of taxation was changed. So for the people who lived in the rural area of Judea, those who were not deported, because you know that the king of Babylonia deported only the people of Jerusalem and the craftsmen, did not deport the peasantry. So for these people, the economic hardship continued more or less unchanged since the days of the kings of Assyria. And these are the people to whom the Levites in the Great Assembly speak. So see how they talk about themselves. At the end of the passage, they say, "We are slaves today, slaves in the land you gave our fathers so they can eat, so they could eat its fruit and the other good things it produces. Because of our sin, its abundant harvest goes to the kings you have placed over us." So this is really the colonial experience. They rule over our corpses and our cattle as they please. They rule over our corpses. This is a very this is a very strong statement. It's not even over our bodies, over our corpus. We are as if we ourselves were dead people. It is really, when I read it, it reminds me of Walter Benjamin and the triumphal procession of the ruling classes on the dead bodies of the exploited people. But that's only a reference. So, if you go back to the idea, what we see in the discourse of the Levites, and on the one hand, and in the book of Genesis Kings on the other hand, we see that we have actually two versions of the myth of Yahvé and Israel. And I use the term myth with all respect. Myth for me, it's not a lie, it's a fiction that involves an extra-human creature or entity, which is of course the case of Yahvé. So the myth of Yahvé and Israel has two versions. One is the ideological version that is found in Nehemiah 9, and actually that is the version that Spinoza has in mind when he speaks that it is intended to inspire obedience. In this version, Yahvé is impeccable. He chooses the people, redeems them from slavery, gives them a land. He does everything out of his goodness, while the people are always stiff-necked and ungrateful. The critical version is in the books of Genesis and Kings, 2 Kings. These books are united by a narrative that lasts for 3,000 years, more or less, about the God Yahvé, who tries to establish himself as the Elohim of the people of Israel. His flaws and limits are exposed in details. So, how do we read the Torah to access this critical dimension of it? Because I think that today it is not always read this way, and I think that it is interesting to read it this way in order for us to exploit this critical potential that I believe is still relevant for our lives today. So this is my method. Of course, you can use other methods as well, but in my method, so as you have seen, I pronounce the name, which is of course a great transgression in the Jewish tradition. I pronounce the name. When I read the text, I read it as I would read any other text. Just like I read the book, I will not change the name of the main protagonist by a title. So here as well, when I read the book, I read Yahvé, I don't use the political or theological title, okay? The eternal, the Lord, etc. So in that respect, I follow, of course, the biblical, the critique of the Bible, the science, the biblical critical science. Okay, but unlike so-called scientific readers of the Bible, I read the text linearly. I do not dissect it to portions to say, okay, this person represents such and such group, or such and such period, or such and such time. No, I read the text linearly because I believe that the truth of the text, as we have it, is found in the story, in the linear story, and there is a story. There is something to get when we read the text that way. And I will even add that many times it is very helpful to read it linearly, ignoring the divisions to chapters, which is, as we know, very late, and focusing, on the other hand, on the division to paragraphs by the Masoretic text, like the text of the way the text of the Torah is written, was transmitted in the Jews, and of which we have material testimonies from as early as the 10th century. So if you follow the division to passages of the Masoretic text, you see that it makes a lot more sense and that it follows the logic of the mythical narrative. Unlike and it reveals a lot of things that the division of two chapters does not tell us. So reading the text linearly, that is also very important, and of course trying to think how the names, how the symbols resonated in Jerusalem of the 5th and 4th century BCE. So what is it? What is going on in this Jerusalem of the Persian period? So we need to remember that it is a capital of a poor province, okay, the Persian Empire, those of you who know the Bible, of course, it is this great empire that rules over many provinces and states and cities. It is very vast, and Jerusalem is found on its margins, and at that time it is a poor province and it is a poor city. Okay, Jerusalem still lies in its ruins. It was a great important city in the 8th and 7th century BCE, but after the destruction of the city by the Babylonian armies, it became very poor, ruined, and in the Persian period it is still half ruined. Okay? There is a small temple, the second temple before the Herodian temple. The second temple that was built was very modest, and what we don't know from the biblical text, but we do know from archaeological findings, is that the governor palace is the most impressive building in the province of the time. The governor palace is found in today's kibbutz Ramat Rachel. It is like 2 or 3 kilometers south to the Temple Mount. Okay, and it has. It is where the governor ruled the province. This is where the taxes, that is the wheat and the olives and the grapes, okay, and the wine and the oil arrived as the tributes to go away, to leave the province to the rest of the imperial network. And this governor palace was there from the Assyrian period. So it is a very important place for the people of the province. They know it well, and they know that this is the place from where the king of the east, whether he is Assyrian or Babylonian or Persian, rules the province. And as you know, or may not know, in this palace there was also a garden from which the places, a garden from which in which there were trees from all over the Persian Empire, trees that were not normally found in the province. So it was a kind of a magical garden that was called Pardes. That was the Persian name for this kind of royal gardens that were scattered along in the Persian Empire. So, of course, when we read the story, we will not get to it because we are out of time, but when we read the story of the Garden of Eden, we have to, and we try to reconstruct how this story resonated for the people of Jerusalem of the Persian period. It may be helpful to think that they have this kind of garden nearby. We also have to remember that the cult of Yahvé is conducted also in Shechem, in the northern province of Samaria. So the temple of Yahvé, and it is also conducted in, at least at one point, in Egypt, in the Elephantine island. So the people know that Yahvé is not only worshipped in Jerusalem. Okay, it gives some relativity to the story, and it allows the people to have some kind of a distance from, allows them to mock Yahvé, okay, to use a critical language, at least to how he is represented, how he is worshipped by the priest of Jerusalem. As I said earlier, there is a thin urban class connected to the priests of other cities and sustained by the peasantry. And, as I said again earlier, some peasants are or were slaves of members of the priestly class. So, I'm out of time now, so we will not have time to go back to the image of the beginning, to the story of Adam and Eve, and how they can be read as two slaves that rebel against their Lord, and how this understanding of the story makes it much more interesting and thought-provoking than what is usually admitted. But yeah, I think I will finish here because I don't want to take too much time. And if you have questions, I will be happy to discuss them with you. Okay, thank you.